way, we had a missing panelist, but he is not un desaparecido. He just didn't come. So that's all right. We have much more. We have a sublime concentration of talent here with us tonight. So thank you all for joining us. This is the Estado de Narco panel, defining the Estado de Narco, talking about what it means, what it signifies. Fundamentally, I'll give my theory of the case, introduce the panelists, and then honestly, you're here to hear from them. These are true experts with a lot of both academic and lived experience in the Estado de Narco. So just to give you a bit of background, one of the things that became clear to me as I really got into U.S.-Mexico policy and understanding the nature of the Mexican state, especially after 2018, was that what previously had been a state with a crime problem became almost crime with the state problem, in a sense. And it's a little bit of a glib thing to say, but really what I believe we've seen evolve, and any of you panelists, feel free to challenge me on this, in the past decade has been something fundamentally qualitatively different from, I would say, quote unquote, normal corruption, which existed in Mexico, it exists in the United States, it exists across a variety of governments around the world. But what we've seen in Mexico is really this phenomenon of a state that exists in synthesis with its own criminal networks. So not in opposition to it, but actually in active cooperation with it, and also requiring those criminal networks access to the goods that they provide, and vice versa, for the sustenance of its rule. So that's what we're here to talk about today with the Estado de Narco panel. I want to welcome all three of our panelists here. We have going from left to right, Dr. Selena Realuyo, professor at the William J. Perry Center for Hemispheric Defense and the National Defense University. Thank you for joining us. We also have Dr. Duncan Wood, the founder and CEO of Hearst International Consulting and well-known scholar, and I read all your stuff, so thank you for that. And we also have a very brave man with us, Manuel Cluthier, here from Sinaloa, who is a diputado in Mexico and has a lot of experience with the Estado de Narco, how it works, and its effects on Mexican civics. So I think the right place to begin is actually talking definitionally, and so I'll start with you, Selena. Then I want to go down and get kind of opening statements from all three of you. Do you concur with the definition? What do you see that's qualitatively different, and how do we handle the Estado de Narco? Small questions.
Sure. So let me take you back to September 2010 at the Council of Foreign Relations here in Washington, D.C., and I was actually present. Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton stated that drug-related violence in Mexico was beginning to resemble a narco state and a Colombian-style insurgency with traffickers controlling parts of the country. She said it's looking more and more like Colombia looked 20 years ago, and where the narco traffickers controlled certain parts of the country. She added, these drug cartels are showing more and more indices of insurgency. So that's when we started talking about this term, the narco state. So it's actually not a Republican or Democratic term. It's been with us for 15 years. So I thought would be useful for the audience is how we define terms, because I think it's really loosely used in the media and in different contexts, how we describe what's going on with the situation in Mexico. So one concept is literally ungoverned spaces. This is where the state lacks any capacity to provide law and order or social services. And we can even say that there's ungoverned spaces here in Washington, D.C., if not the rest of the United States. A better term is alternatively governed spaces. This is where someone else, so for example, those who are not duly elected, and they could be gangs, criminals, insurgents, are actually replacing government officials in terms of providing social services and security, whether the use of militias, those types of things. When we start to look at something called the criminal state, which actually Moises Naim made famous by considering Venezuela under Chavez and Maduro, criminalized state is where criminal elements use the state and co-opt the state to promote their nefarious agenda, which is really maximizing profits through criminal activities. Then we go into state capture, and this is a much more extreme definition where alternative governing bodies physically take over the state. And this has actually been discussed in terms of Mexico. What we're seeing, though, also this concept of the narco state, where it's specific drug trafficking organizations that are now replacing elected officials. So when we think about Mexico, the way I think of Mexico, I don't think we're at state capture yet. And actually, remember, Mexico is made of multiple states. So it's actually at the sub-state level as opposed to the national level. I think it's actually a criminalized state. I would not necessarily use narco state as well as state capture yet, but that's a subject of debate. We also know that it's not a failed state, which we can put Haiti in as a category, right? It has free and fair elections. It actually has elected government. It's consolidated at the federal level. But what we're seeing is, sadly, because of what we see from the news, the numbers that are coming out in terms of violence, homicides per 100,000, and the physical, like the illicit economy that's actually becoming a very significant part of the GDP of the country is alarming. And since they're our neighbor to the south, it has huge implications for our national security.
Thank you very much. Dr. Wood, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. I mean, I'm going to be boring and agree with pretty much everything that Selena said. I think that precision is really, really important. We can toss around terms like narco state. We can toss around terms like the absence of the state. But the truth is, in Mexico, being a federal system, there's an enormous amount of diversity, and it's extremely fluid as well. You can visit one part of the country which is very, very safe, that there isn't a strong presence of organized crime, but 2 years later, you go there and things have changed entirely. And that's because of the dynamics, the very fluid dynamics between organized crime groups and between the state writ large and those organized crime groups. And I would include there the role of the United States as well. And so, Selena talked about governance issues. And I would say that Mexico should be understood as a country which has fragmented co-government in specific territories. And I know that sounds overly academic, but what does it mean? It means that, in some parts of government, you will find that there is a very strong presence of organized crime in general and criminality. In other parts of government, much less so. And in some parts of government, they've been, held to be, maintained to be relatively free of influence. And the differences between the federal, state, and local government is very, very important to remember. There was an estimate, probably going back 15 years now, that 80% of local governments have been infiltrated by organized crime. I don't know how you verify that number, but it's entirely possible that that was true at the time. But that's certainly not the case with the federal government. But we also can't be blind to the fact that there have been senior government officials within successive Mexican governments that have been working with organized crime, and we have a lot of evidence to support that. Cartels increasingly, organized crime groups increasingly seek to influence elections. They do penetrate local governments. They shape policing and judicial outcomes, and of course that's very, very important in the context of the recent judicial reform in Mexico. They control territory and economic activity to a wide degree in specific locations. And I think we can say that we've seen the relationship between state actors and organized crime groups to be often transactional rather than ideological. I mean, and I'll bring this down to a very real example in a second, based on corruption, intimidation, mutual accommodation very often. And that goes back decades in Mexico. And I'll give you the classic example that everybody uses, the term of plata o plomo, silver or lead. Many, many years ago, we hosted a mayor from a small town in the state of Puebla, here in Washington. And we sat down with him and we talked about the infiltration of organized crime within his municipality. And I said, can you rely on your police force? Are they corrupt? And he said, they're good men, but there's 8 of them. I don't have a budget to really buy them gasoline for their cars. I don't have much of a budget to buy them bullets for their guns. And he says, and anyway, there's 8 of them. Even if I had them armed to the teeth, the local crime group can mobilize hundreds of heavily armed men, within minutes and get them to a location. So it's not that they are corrupt. They're good men who are trying to do a job. But are they going to lay down their lives for nothing? No, they're probably not. And, you know, all of us, I think, in this room have heard multiple stories that are similar to that. And, of course, it extends into the political realm as well, where politicians are offered a choice between accept the bribe, or we're going to kill you, or we're going to kill somebody in your family. And that's a really, really difficult situation to be in. The next thing I would say is that, you know, organized crime is, of course, a transnational phenomenon. It's a political economy that extends beyond the border. And we, you know, in the previous panel, we had a good conversation, ultimately not very satisfying, about demand for drugs here in the United States and southbound weapons trafficking. But, you know, also in Mexico, you've got the phenomenon of weak judicial systems, and you've got the highly profitable illicit global markets. Now, there's a lot of celebration right now about the decline or reduction of homicides in Mexico. I celebrate that as well. It's good news. But it doesn't mean that the problem has been solved. Homicides are still high. And of course, problems of extortion, kidnapping, etc., are still there. This really does come down to our understanding, I believe, of, you know, overall governance and whether or not we have robust institutions that are protected from the influence of organized crime. And sadly, I think that's not the case in much of Mexico.
Thank you very much. Senor Clutia, you have lived this in some dramatic ways. Would love your views.
First, I want to thank Josh and the American First Policy Institute for the invitation. Secondly, I want to share a few ideas that I think they can help to understand the problem first. Then we'll enter to some other things. But the first idea I want to share is the Mexican state, the government, has the power and the means to defeat the mafia. They do have the power. The second one is the arrogance of the mafia in Mexico, or the cartels, or whatever you want to call them, is proportional to the absence or to the complicity of the state. And we have a very arrogant mafia in Mexico, especially in my state, in Sinaloa, where I come from. So we can conclude too that the main problem in Mexico is not the absence of the state, but the complicity. Because there is no mafia without institutional support. We cannot have a mafia or cartel, whatever you want to call them, I insist, without political corruption, without political complicity. So the presence, for example, of the cartels in Sinaloa, the state where I live, is an undeniable sign of political corruption. We have had for decades this problem in Sinaloa. I have denounced it publicly for decades too, more than 25 years, saying, hey, we have a problem here, hey. Nobody cares. Now we're paying the consequence. And also, that is what I call the original sin. The original sin is when government politicians get the power in alliance with the organized crime. And that's where the whole problem starts. And that has to do, these alliances start with the finance of the campaigns. And that's the original sin on a politician. So another one is the mafia represents a problem of sovereignty, how you say?
Sovereignty. Sí.
Sovereignty,
Soberanía.
conflict with the state over the same territory. Who commands on that territory? ¿Quién manda, we say in Mexico, in that territory? Who controls that territory? The government or the criminals? And let me tell you something. People always know who manda. quién manda. People always know who controls. That's why when they took El Chapo away, they bring it to the United States. Some journalists said, oh, it's going to be a big problem in Sinaloa. Not going to happen anything. Why? Because people don't say that the Chapo manda. He didn't control Sinaloa. It was the Mayo. So they took Chapo, nothing happened. They took Mayo, we have a great problem now of violence. So I want to refer myself to the Comisario Guerrero, that's a police marshal, a French police marshal, who has a book called The G9 of the Mafias in the World. And he says, if you want to know who rules over a territory, ask the people. My hobby is hunting. And I can tell you that animals are territorial. So the most animalistic instinct of a human being must be territorial. Leaders of cartels are territorial. You want to take control, get control of the territory. And that takes us that the most territorial, primitive, and violent of the human being, that's what we have as the leaders of the cartel.
Thank you very much. You know, we might as well dive in on the most contentious illumination of the Estado de Narco, however defined today, which is obviously the indictment of the governor of Sinaloa, Ruben Rocha Moyo, who, together with Senator Nzunza and 8 of their closest friends, is now wanted by the U.S. Department of Justice for a variety of crimes involving corruption, trafficking, and so on. Actually, Senor, I hate to put you on the spot again, but I want to start with you and then work down on this. Talk to us a little bit about your views on that case, because I know you have some, and how that relates to this synthesis of criminality and the state that we're talking about here.
Sorry, I didn't understand the first part of the...
Well, I'm interested in your views on the Rocha indictment, specifically, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I could say that the Rocha issue is similar in some way to the Mencho issue. Why? Because both give a message. We have a message there. We are sending the message that not even narcos nor narco politicians are unbeatable. They are not gonna give impunity. They are humans, and they're gonna pay and are gonna be accountable. So what can I do with that message? I have to give an applause.
Dr. Wood?
Listen, it's been coming for a long time. There's been a lot of discussion about the United States insisting that politicians who are involved with organized crime begin to pay the price. And so it's not a surprise that this has happened. But it gets us to some people have said we're now beyond the route, we've crossed the Rubicon, that we're in a new reality. And I think that the reaction from the Mexican government, which we'll talk about more later on, I imagine, but I think it's very understandable. And I think it's worth putting ourselves in the shoes of the Mexican government at this point in time to think, what would it be like if a sitting American governor was indicted by a foreign government? What would the reaction be? And I think the smart thing is to say, let's begin a full investigation, because if there's compelling evidence, then let's do it. And let's remember the sort of the foundations of any functioning justice system. There should be a proper investigation, the gathering of evidence, the forensic approach, essentially. I guess what this does is it casts a spotlight on so many different levels of government, not just at the state level. And it casts a spotlight on the ruling party itself, but pretty much every political party in Mexico, because every political party in Mexico has had its problems in this regard. So I would say, evidence is important. I'm glad that it's out there. It's been shared with the Mexican government. We've seen similar cases in the past, not so much with sitting politicians, but with military figures or former politicians who were military figures who have been, even arrested here in the United States and then returned to Mexico. And I think that set a confusing precedent, I think, for some people in Mexico. But, honestly, my reaction to it is that kind of saw it coming, but it does put the Mexican government now in a very difficult position, and I'm not surprised by the president's reaction.
Selena?
So it's a sign of the judicial instrument of national power, and it's also quite reflective of the Trump administration's position on narco-terrorists. So you also have to remember that it's not so, in the first Trump administration, the DEA actually arrested the sitting Minister of Defense at the time, Cienfuegos, then who was returned to Mexico, who then was found innocent of all charges, as in spite of 7 years of DEA investigations. So it's kind of reminiscent of that. What we're also seeing, though, this is not a new thing. We've been doing it in Latin America. They call it the Clinton list, which is actually the drug kingpin strategy. And it's also how we brought Nicolas Maduro and his wife to New York. So these are all very, even though they occur in different countries, they're actually thematically all aligned to this position now. And I brought today, it just came out yesterday, the new counterterrorism strategy by the White House, only 16 pages, where it's a full frontal assault on narco-terrorist groups. And it's an area where we're going to see a lot more of the different instruments of national power that are being used. You see it now through what we're doing in the Caribbean with the drug boats, and that's through Operation Southern Sphere, so that's the military instrument of national power. Then you've seen sanctions, which is the economic instrument of national power. This is where we name, shame, block their assets, which is quite important. And then the other thing that we love to do, having been formerly with the State Department, we like to cancel visas of not just the actual, their family members who are studying, let's say, at Harvard or here at Georgetown. That seems to hurt them more. And then we're also taking a look at how the messaging is working. So what I don't think we appreciate is all of these very aggressive new strategies have a power of dissuasion. So that's why we actually have seen fentanyl trafficking drop by 20%. 27% of fentanyl overdose deaths have gone down. That's a lot in a year. And we're still consuming drugs, but more importantly, that's a pretty significant dent in just 1 year. And unfortunately, it's not covered in the news. And despite what it perceives to be the relationship between Sheinbaum and Trump, at the tactical and operational level, and as you know, Josh, I've literally educated scores of these officers, we're working very well together, and actually we've seen a lot of progress that have led to the takedown of El Mencho and all of his financiers. And I think you know that I spent a lot of time on the money piece.
Yes.
Super important. To me, the center of gravity of the Mexican cartels is the money. And unfortunately, that's where the politicians succumb to the money. It's really plata o plomo, it really is that. And the more that we can go after the financiers, the better. I know we're looking at Sinaloa, but actually in the case of the Jalisco cartel, they were able to go after not just El Mencho, but his financier's name is El Tuli. And we're starting to do the financial forensics with the Mexicans to understand how they run the business. It's much harder to actually replace the accountant and the financier than the number 1, 2, 3 of, how many chapitos are there, right, for Sinaloa?
Yeah, too many.
Yeah, there's one still out there. But this is why we're starting to look at all the instruments of national power and then put them together. And you'll see in the new strategy, I'm very proud since I was able to contribute a lot of it. A lot is looking at the financial networks, because that is very hard to replace. And also, we consider the money as the oxygen for any of these organizations, not to mention their objective is to maximize profits. Everyone's in this business to make money. And just for those who don't really follow the fentanyl business, and Duncan knows, I've testified on this and asked to designate the cartels for the last 15 years. A fentanyl-laced pill costs 30 cents to make in a laboratory in Mexico. Here in front of the National Stadium and in front of the Audi Stadium next to my office, that same pill is sold for $20. Every young person has $20. The other thing that you might not know, that pill gives you a high of 3 to 4 hours. So it's a very economical, recreational, as opposed to you'd have to buy about $200 worth of cocaine to have the same impact. So what we're working with is a very efficient market that has, there's no other product that's as lucrative as a fentanyl-laced pill. And it's being marketed, they're coloring them to look with pastels in order to attract a younger consumer. They look like candies. And as you probably know, I've actually said that this is the asymmetrical war that the Chinese and the Mexican cartels are waging against our youth. So to me, it's fantastic that we've seen this drop of 27% of basically fentanyl overdose deaths, but we've got a long way to go. Especially as you're all entering graduation season. This is my public service announcement. And then, proms. There's the campaign by a DEA called One Pill Can Kill. You'll see this on the news, on the local news this month in May. It's so important to make our young people aware. And this is where I think there was a question in the last panel about consumption. We're guilty here in the United States of our addiction, but the more you can dissuade young people, and I'm sorry to say it, scare them, because it's only grains of fentanyl, not grams, that can actually kill you. And this is why we're dealing with a much more lethal adversary than before, and it's so lucrative. And this is where we're really fighting against the economics of narco trafficking, plus the fact that they're so powerful because of the weaponry and the physical ability they have in different states like Sinaloa and Jalisco to actually replace the governing bodies.
Josh, can I just make a couple of very quick comments? Just
Of
on
course,
that?
yeah.
I mean, the first thing is, I mentioned earlier on about how fluid the situation is with, organized crime in general, but the drug trade. For the past 10 to 15 years, we've been moving rapidly into the era of synthetic drugs. And synthetic drugs, which, is what fentanyl is, that's highly fluid as well. They're constantly coming up with new formulations. And we don't know where drugs are going to go next, but it will change, it will evolve. And part of that is to escape regulation, but a lot of it is just to produce a better consumer experience. There's so much evidence out there that drug cartels operating here in the United States, the distributors, they really do have almost like a Domino's-like approach to drug distribution. 30 minutes or it's free. Checking in with clients later on to say, did you enjoy the experience? We've heard from some clients that it wasn't as good as last time, so we're going to give you a freebie, et cetera, et cetera. It's an extraordinary business, and that brings me back to Selena's point that ultimately this is a business. And so the financial side of things is so important. I'll never forget Stephen Dudley of Inside Crime, when he was a fellow at the Wilson Center, did this incredible investigation where he spoke to accountants of organized crime groups that were now in jail, and they have detailed accounts of everything, including paying for the psychiatric care of some of their sicarios who are experiencing trauma. These are businesses that say, these are valuable human resources to us. We want to take care of them. And so I think that's a fascinating thing to remember. And lastly, what FinCEN has been doing recently, I think is so important because it has put the fear of God into Mexican banks, which means that they are now coming up with better protections because they know they need to. And just one last thing, the capture of El Chapo, which you mentioned, is so important, and of others, of course, just in gathering new evidence and information. And that kind of cascading effect is what is taking us, I think, into this next phase of the struggle.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir. Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to share my definition of narco state. It is a country where the government institutions have been penetrated taken literally by the power of criminal organizations. That means it's a state where organized crime, through organized corruption, I want to make a distinction between corruption and organized corruption, they control the state institutions to facilitate multi-criminal activities. Mafias are not a product. It's not a drug dealer. Mafias are multi-criminal activities. And they assure impunity. That's my definition. So organized criminals, cartels or mafias, whatever you want to call them, take control of the territory, supplanting the government. Examples of that, and I'm going to just make a few. Sinaloa is a great example of that, my born state. Tamaulipas, there are some people here from there. Michoacán is a clearly example. And why is this? Because organized crime, understood with organized corruption, both are mafias. They talk the same language, and they saw the benefits of working together. So that is the result of what I call an narco-state. When organized crime and organized corruption get together and take the benefits of their both alliance.
I love that. Thank you. I want to shift gears here just a little bit. Now, we had our Mexican civics panel earlier. Stephanie was on it. Thank you, Stephanie Nara was on it. I was on it too. And so I don't want to make this into a Mexican civics panel, I want to be clear, but I do want to focus on one aspect of Mexican civic reform that plausibly plays into the Estado de Narco, and I want to get your opinions on it. The phenomenon I have in mind is this. Morena has been in control of Mexican government since December 2018. Essentially, they've got supermajorities in the states and the legislature. They've controlled the presidency for 2 terms, which is a long time in Mexico. And so they have advanced this program, what they call the Cuatro Transformación, the 4T, one element of which is essentially the elimination of independent civil society institutions. So they took away the NGO certifications within the past month, I believe. INE, the Election Institute, which is very well respected, has had its independence curbed. The statistical data is no longer super reliable. I was going to ask you about the homicide data, but I won't put you on the spot quite yet, Duncan, on that. But there's been a lot of cuts that have essentially eroded. I think the judicial reform is arguably the most consequential one that have eroded independent centers of power throughout Mexico. How does that play into, Celine, I'll start with you. How does that play into the phenomenon of the Estado de Narco? Or if you don't think it does, feel free to push back against that.
Well, it looks like it's also part of a category that's a broader issue across Latin America and certain countries. It's democratic blacksiding, right? So the fact that you would not have the civic sector, if we think about any society, you have the public sector, the private sector, and the civic sector. And the civic sector is very important, and I would even put the journalists in the civic sector, right? And we've seen how they've been traumatized and attacked. And now, sadly, it is the most dangerous country to be in as a journalist. Yeah. And it's disturbing. If you couple that with now less than an independent judiciary, I'll be diplomatic to say it, we would see in the past that officials would be elected and then corrupted, right? Now the fear that I have is, and it's not just in Mexico, but in other countries as well, that they're going to run their own candidates and finance their own candidates. So what you're going to see is it's going to bleed into the institutions where these people will be duly elected, right? They are going to run as candidates and then enter government, and then from inside corrupt. And sadly, this is actually the model that Chavez and Maduro used in order to infiltrate and turn Venezuela into what Moises Naim calls a criminalized state. And I use criminalized state as opposed to narco state because I think we underappreciate, and you know this very well, they're very astute. It's multi-crime. It's not just drug trafficking organizations anymore. It took me a long time to learn huachicolero. Now I use it as my password. because no one will figure out that as my password.
She has, if you're going to try it, she has two-factor on.
Yeah, exactly. No, but the thing is, they find any which way, right? They're diversifying away from just drugs. But what's crazy is because the fentanyl synthetic meth and fentanyl business is so lucrative and we're so addicted to it, they've kind of gone back to drugs. But I think we should understand that these groups, the extortion, the kidnappings, it's in any which way, and also how they exploit the supply chain. And this is where I fear that there are no longer independent watch groups in the civic sector that will raise issues and curb and make people accountable. And then if you have these people who are now elected, like basically they are the representatives of the narcos in whether it's municipal, state, or federal government. And this is what we're kind of seeing with Morena. And this is the fear that there's no way to curb that.
Duncan?
I mean, very quickly, many years ago at the Wilson Center, we produced a book called Resilient Communities, where we looked at where communities had not, it wasn't that they were able to resist an onslaught by organized crime, but they were able to bounce back afterwards. And we found a very simple formula. It was where you actually had effective collaboration between 3 levels of government, federal, state, and local. It's where you had the cooperation of local journalists, civil society, and of the private sector, which meant that you only had a very small number of successful stories there, but it was worth drawing it out. Now when you sort of combine that with the story of today, where I would agree with you that over the past 8 years, we have seen sustained attacks on independent journalism, on civil society, and certainly we've seen quite open attacks during the AMLO administration against a lot of business leaders. You know, I'm on the board of an organization called Signos Vitales, which does in-depth reports on the effectiveness of government policy, what has actually been achieved. My name appeared on the Mañanera, AMLO's morning press conference, twice, because he put up the list of board members of this organization because they were doing effective research and investigation of publication. Now, as he went through the list of people on the board, he said, this guy's a neoliberal, this guy's corrupt. He got to me and he said, I have no idea who this guy is, which is like, bonus. Okay, fantastic, I got away with that one. But, you know, I have very dear friends who have been subject to, you know, obviously threats, but also spying. And here's where I'll make an important point. It's not just under the Morena governments. This has happened before in Mexico as well. You know, the pre-government of Enrique Peña Nieto used the Pegasus spying software on civil society members as well. And lastly, on business. Business has been told very, very clearly, stop financing civil society organizations that are investigating corruption. And, you know, they know, the business leaders know that it's not in their interest to keep doing so. So that funding is drying up. And so it all begins to come together. Now, is the purpose to enhance the the opportunities for organized crime? No, it's to protect the government from attacks and from criticism. But it has that perhaps unintended consequence as well.
Senor Cloutier, is the basket of Morena reforms designed to help their narco partners?
I would like to end my intervention. I made a list of what I think we should do. I don't know if you're interested.
I am interested. Can we make that the last thing we say, the prescriptions? I do want to hear that, but I also want to hear if you think the Morena domestic reforms, especially Poder Judicial, is an aid to the narco partners.
One of the points that I put, Morena has become one of the organized corruption that got allied with the organized crime. That's we can say it in Sonora, Sinaloa, and Nayarit in the elections of 2021. That was documented. I mean, it's not my idea. It's you have the facts there. So I do think that Morena has been doing everything to control the country. They are stepping back on democracy to authoritarian medidas,
Measures, yes, sir.
and in order to, all this problem is that they are having good results in taking control of the country. See? So, what matters if I'm having good results? I mean, we have violence, we have no medical assistance, we have all these problems, education and whatever, but they have control of the elections, they have control of the politics. So they are having the results they do want, not what we need or what we want. So I really think that Morena is being, it was even predictable. If we saw the J-curve that Ian Bremmer shared us in his book called the J-curve. That curve is very clear that Mexico stood too many times, too much years on the valley of the curve that Ian Bremmer said, move from there. Either you advance in the consolidation of institutions on the liberty and openness, or step back to authoritarian government, but don't stay there because it's going to be very dangerous for your country. That's what Bremer said. So what happened in Mexico is we have had about 3, escape valves.
Sure.
That helped that Mexico didn't got into a civil war, revolution.
Yes.
And one of them is migration. It's escape.
Yeah.
The other one is informal economy. Gives jobs that doesn't get on the formal form.
Right.
And the leftist governments.
Yes.
The 3 became a bulb of escape. We were, just before 2018, Mexico, I went to campaigns on the street and things like that, and you feel it, and you hear it. People was very, very angry.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have time for Q&A. My only request of you is that you do ask a question. So are there any questions? Okay, we got two up here. So Jose and then Mr. Lindemann. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I appreciate it. Never mind. I appreciate everything y'all said. It's very informative. I was just wondering, Manuel, you mentioned how the corruption starts in campaigns and how cartel groups fund campaigns for politicians. But Mexico, the INE already provides a lot of money to political parties for them to run campaigns, specifically to avoid this issue of like special interest groups, like, you know, leading politics in a certain direction. It's very evident that it's not working. So it opens a question of whether the INE should be using all these public funds to give to campaigns. But if that's not working, what's the route that the Mexican government should take? Not that they will, but they should take to stop this from being the case in the future.
You want to take that, sir?
If you think, I want to give my list because it includes the point.
Okay.
So,
All right.
If you don't have any...
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure we have time for questions too, but go ahead. Go ahead. That's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, first, what we have to do, we have to fight against organized corruption. I already said that. We have to combat money laundering. Nobody's talking about that. And in Mexico, they don't combat money laundering because we have 2 sources. They come from the organized crime, and they come from the organized corruption of the politicians. So they don't want to combat that, okay? Also, we have to make anti-cash efforts. Felipe Calderón, when he was president, he put a tax to the cash deposits to the banks. And it was a very, very small percentage. It didn't collect money. It gathered information. and that was very important. But then became Peña Nieto, and he took over because they became the king of the cash, and after then AMLO took that place. And we have also to guide efforts to encourage the informal economy to a formal one. We have to make a great effort in Mexico to get the formal employees and the formal investment, because informal economy is that big that helps all the informal money that comes from the organized crime. Also, we have to prevent illegal money to financing the political campaigns. That should be a point. And that illegal money comes from public resources and from criminal resources, both. We have to strengthen the rule of law, which someone already talked about that, to give certainty and to have to reduce the discretionary power of the authorities. Because when we have discretionality, it gets two things: corruption or abuse of power. And we have to reinforce the democratic institutions to restrain power and promote accountability. We have a great corruption on the SAT. SAT is the IRS of us in Mexico. But we have great corruption in the FGR, which is the Federal Prosecutor's Office. Tremendous corruption there too. And we have now great corruption in the Supreme Court and all the judicial system. So we have to work on that too. And finally, what happened that these three institutions, SAT, FGR, and Supreme Court, are being used by the power, by the executive, to suppress dissent and to persecute opposition.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to go to Mr. Lindemann for a question. Go ahead. And then Stephanie, you're next, and then Sir. Then you, sorry. Then next.
So quickly, the Diputado talked about organized corruption. It's a theme here. Selena talked about the other activities of cartels. I would be interested to know your judgment on, I think, the most complicit activity that the United States and Mexico have together unintentionally that the narco world exploits is legal trade. We talk about, this is a huge problem. Having served in Nuevo Laredo and seen the largest port in Mexico, massive amounts of legal goods crossing back and forth regularly, everyone cheers it. But I'm sure the Diputado knows this, the others as well. This cargo does not move across northern Mexico, across Tamaulipas, in billions of dollars of value without monies being paid to the cartels to make sure that the trade moves without problems. How's this done? The Mexicans are very effective, very modern. They control the license brokers that go back and forth that operate in both countries, et cetera. So I'm making a speech. I'll stop.
Okay, that's all right.
Question. I think there's more money involved than how much money do you think is a cut? I've made some studies on this, of legal trade that gets paid off to the cartels. That's it. It's a larger source of money than narcotics or money made off of moving illegal migrants.
The question is, how big is it?
How big is it? Yeah.
And you've done a study on it?
I've done a study on it.
What's the answer?
Well, I'd like to hear what the panel says.
Oh, it's not a quiz session. I'm just...
Do 2%. Do 2%. Do 2%.
Okay. You think it's 2%? Does anybody disagree with that? Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah. Okay. All right. Next question, Stephanie. Go ahead. Wait for the mic. We're recording. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to be brief. So I'm going to know if you think whether the Australian solution will work for Mexico, the US. What they did is they start governing the methamphetamine trade. So they have like clinics run by the government who decided what people injected and who needed that, so they kicked cartels off and they diminished their death rate by OD, so to speak.
Selena?
It's pretty hard to do here in the United States. I mean, we have zombie cities that are around because a lot of the people who use, a lot of the homeless you see on the street, they don't want treatment. So this is the thing, it's one of those ones you have to have a willing audience to do it. And we've kind of experimented this. In Canada, they've done the same thing. That's another panel looking at that. And I think the question is how you can learn, lessons learned from other pieces. But we have to take a look at it holistically. You have to look at the user piece, the consumption piece, and then more importantly, the supply. So we spent a lot of time today talking about supply, but you have to hit it at both ends. And I think we're now here in the United States, I think making young people realize how dangerous these drugs are. So much so that we're actually seeing an increase in consumption of cocaine. And here in DC, unfortunately, we're starting to see cocaine laced with fentanyl. And we had the first instances of young people dying from an overdose of cocaine. Normally, you don't die of an overdose of cocaine, but because they're putting fentanyl in it, makes it cheaper for the producer, and it's more an enhanced high. So just as they're learning techniques of making their product better, we have to understand that and be what I call more anticipatory. How do we expect? And you were talking about how is it evolving? And the other thing is, I think other countries are starting, they don't know that fentanyl is taking place in their countries because they don't know how to detect it. It doesn't have a smell. It's hard to intercept because it doesn't smell like marijuana, cocaine, or heroin. So all these trained dogs that we have all around Europe are not actually useful. But this is why it's a good thing to take a look at what other countries are doing, but it's hard depending on the context of how you oblige the users. They have to voluntarily participate.
We're under 5 minutes, so we have time for 2 really quick questions left. So you, ma'am, and then you, sir.
Thank you. I'll take a minute to give some context to my question. I worked in several agencies for the Mexican government security sector. So I do know like every single topic that I've heard today and in the other panels has been talked about in the past. And cooperation, even though it fluctuates, it has happened before. So my question very precisely is, how do we, both Mexican and Americans, go about not having this like selective amnesia and actually learning the lessons collectively to not just do the thing that we both need to do, but escape our own narratives of political and electoral cycles?
I'll take this one very briefly. You know, there's a famous phrase from John Paul Vann that the United States was not in Vietnam 15 years, but it was in Vietnam for 15 one-year wars, right? And so this issue crops up again and again in the nature of bureaucracies. And to your point, I think it's something that absolutely bedevils the U.S.-Mexico relationship, particularly when it comes to just operational approaches. And we do, I mean, it's a flaw of democratic systems writ large that you tend to reinvent the wheel every time you have a change of, so part of the answer is in candor, bureaucracies and expertise embodied by several of the people up here. And so that's, I think once you get that core of good, qualified, competent people who have longevity institutionally, they become the safeguard against exactly that. That's easy to say. As you know, it's hard to do. Sir?
Very quickly, as a Mexican in the U.S. and in this era of polarization, how do you combat this stigmatized idea that Mexico is narco? Because Mexico is a lot more things than narco. And nowadays, I mean, every conversation starts about this topic because it's in the media and everyone is talking about. So which communication strategies should we do together to combat those stigmas?
Extradite Rocha.
Sorry.
Extradite Rocha? That's the answer. I mean, sorry, anybody else want to weigh in on that?
I mean, I would just say this, that, you know, it's been a question, I think, in Mexico for a long time. How do you overcome the image? And perhaps a good comparison is Colombia. You know, Colombia has done this extraordinary job of changing their image without necessarily changing much of the reality of the drug trade within the country. It's a safer country now than it was 20 years ago because the FARC has been, dealt with mostly, but drugs are still being produced there. There's still a very high homicide rate, et cetera, but they did an amazing job of campaigning, public relations campaign here. The Disney Corporation helped out enormously with Encanto, of course, but they knew how to capitalize on that. And I thought we saw some very interesting things towards the end of the Calderon administration, actually, on changing Mexico's image. I mean, that movie they made about the diversity of Mexico was an extraordinary effort, I think. But I haven't seen a very capable approach to doing this. And I've been part of lots of conversations in Mexico about, how do we fix Mexico's image? And the reality is, you have to change what's the truth on the ground, because Mexicans know what the reality is. And, I mean, I'm British, so the one thing I share with all Mexicans is that sentido de humor negro, okay? I love that dark sense of humor. And you'll hear it time and time again. I mean, they'll joke about pretty much anything, right? And that means that they're always going to tell the truth about things, So you have to fix the reality on the ground. But I think that Mexico, and I put this in all of my writing, why isn't Mexico doing more to be present here in Washington and telling a more positive story? And we've got people from the embassy here who work really hard on this, but they lack the resources. And when the president, be it AMLO or Sheinbaum, comes to Washington and doesn't even bother going to Congress, things aren't going to change. The latest piece that I wrote in Le Universal was about the success of King Charles' speech to Congress, because it's not just about the administration. You have to convince those guys, which is a much more permanent institution ultimately, and it's about the friendship between people. So that's what I would say. You've got to spend more on your relations here in Washington.
I think that's a great place to stop. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at time. I apologize. I know the conversation does need to continue, and I hope it does in the hallways. But we're going to break here. Please join me in giving a hand to our panelists who have given their time, their expertise, come a long way. Thank you all. Selena, Duncan, Sandro Cloutier. In 15 minutes, we're going to reconvene in the main ballroom for our final session, which is going to have Deputy Assistant Secretary of War Joseph Humeyer and NSC, from the NSC, Michael Jensen, on America and the Western Hemisphere. Please join us there. Thank you all very much.